Probably one of the most overlooked components in an electrical system are the cables that connect everything together. Today we have Steve Kjeldgaard on the podcast to talk about Spartan Power cables. These are some of the best cables on the market and are the most flexible cables we have seen. In addition, he talks about inverters and specifically the Spartan line of inverters and inverter chargers. This episode is packed full of information, so get ready and let's get into it.
Hey Steve, thanks for coming on the show. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at Spartan Power?
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for having us on. We're really excited to be here. My name is Steve Kjeldgaard. I've been doing sales, technical support, customer service for Spartan Power now, coming up on 2.5, 3 years. So I met them. I was actually studying at University of Nevada, Reno. We're based out of Reno, Nevada. And I met the owner, and he was just very excited to meet me. You know, I'd been doing door-to-door sales, and he's like, we need people who can do sales, so come on in. And so after working part-time for them while going to school, you know, I realized what an amazing industry this is. You know, we've seen a crazy blessing of increased business because of COVID. Not to say that that's good in any way, shape, or form, but we're not complaining. You know, we just want to make sure we're trying to help as many folks as we can do what they want to do during this time. So I've been doing sales primarily, but I help wherever it's needed just about 3 years now.
And just a side note, when I went out to visit Battleborn Batteries out there in Reno, Sean Nichols took me over to the University of Nevada, Reno campus. That's a beautiful campus there.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Yeah, I'm from California originally. I came out here and I never looked back. Never looked back.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said you've been there about 3 years. When did Spartan Power start?
Perfect. So I believe the company actually started back in 2017, simply with, you know, a couple of cutters, cable, terminals, you know, and crimpers, and really just caring about what we're producing. Started small, and that's one thing I really appreciate about our owner, the CEO of our company right now, is the fact that he has started really small, and he hasn't tried to bite off more than he could chew. You know, he really makes sure that before he kind of levels up or takes the next step in business, that he's got his foundations locked in. So every cable is quality inspected before it ever leaves the shop. And that started when he was the first guy making cables. And so I love the fact that we still carry that on, even though we've got 2 different shifts now and we bring tons of people on to help us keep up with the demand. Our quality is not diminishing in any way, shape, or form.
And you just shared some exciting news right before we recorded. I'm not sure if it's too early to announce, but you guys are growing and you're expanding into a new building that's going to be larger. And I would imagine that helps you guys handle larger loads of quantities and moving.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest issue right now, one, is just getting cable. In the industry, as anyone who's studied this stuff, everyone's dealing with shortages right now, whether it's battery cells and the actual parts to build a battery to the actual copper strand inside all of our cable. You know, at the end of the day, we're just experiencing shortage. And so the more we can keep in-house, the more product we have on the floor ready to be created, manufactured, assembled, whatever term you want to use, you know, the happier we're going to be and the happier our clients are going to be. Absolutely.
I hate to jump into the most exciting part we think of your cables right away, but how are your cables so much more flexible than other cabling of the same gauge?
Sure. So at this time, I mean, there's a number of reasons that you can go into. I just grabbed a 4-gauge cable. Now you're going to hear a lot of folks that'll say, well, 4-gauge is flexible regardless of what cable you go with, right? I personally believe that the reason, even when you get up to 4-aught, that our cables are really flexible is because of the copper strands inside. We're not using really thick copper strands in there. We are actually using 30-gauge copper strands. And so in this small cable right here, you know, about the size of a number 2 pencil, maybe a little bit larger in diameter, you know, you're actually seeing close to about 420 copper strands inside this cable. So if we went in and stripped this cable, you'd see 420 copper strands. And then you go all the way up to our 4-aught cable and you're closer to 2100. and that's actual individual copper strands. And so that being more flexible because they're just much smaller and allow that bend where some of the other cables with thicker copper inside of it just won't give you that.
Yeah, and for anybody that's listening, when Steve is talking about the flexibility of this cable, I have a Spartan cable and my battery set up with our Battle-Born batteries. He is able to flex this cable more, I said this earlier, more than a Twizzler. A Twizzler would break if you tried to flex it as much as he's flexing this gauge wire right now.
Absolutely.
It's unbelievable.
Well, and it's exciting too, because you see some of the coolest installs that we've ever seen right now. You know, we're seeing anything from vans to the back of truck campers that, you know, they just have a shell on there and they're decking it out to this livable, you know, abide. Like it's absolutely awesome. And so being able to have a cable that you're able to say, hey, you got to run 90 degrees that way and then immediately turn around and go this way, let's do it. You know what I mean? And so that just helps. You know, we talk to a wide variety of clients on a daily basis that are doing everything from, you know, as we mentioned, cabins in the woods in the middle of nowhere to massive, you know, hundreds of feet yachts that are just putting batteries in, being able to run whatever they want while they're underway. So yeah, it's a lot of fun being able to work with a product that has such a wide variety of applications.
And so, you guys do, oh, sorry, Kenny.
No, go ahead, Sean.
You guys do custom cables for people as well, right? They're not just all off-the-shelf cable lengths. You can do custom work as well.
Right. So, I mean, this guy right here, this is a standard 1-footer. So this is our 4-gauge 5/16, when we're talking 5/16, that's the ring terminal right there, 1-footer. And so this is probably one of the most common items that we've sold, believe it or not. Even though it's a little bit smaller than some folks want to see in systems, it sells every single day. And so the cool part is we'll have folks walk through our door. We rarely, I apologize, we don't do much local advertising. Even though we're based in Reno, we don't have ads, billboards saying, come get a custom cable. And yet we still have folks that find us. Of course, our address is on our website. So they just walk through the door and go, can you make me this? And we look at it and we go, let's figure it out. You know, so I've had times where we've done some crazy stuff. Sometimes it won't sell. You know, we've got that quality standard where we say, you know what? As much as we would want to do this custom project for you, it doesn't meet our standard. We're not going to be able to provide our lifetime crimp warranty on it. So we're not able to sell it to you, but here you go. You know, little things like that. So at the end of the day, we've done everything from really short cables, you know, with 4-gauge, I think they're getting them down to, you know, 2 or 3 inches, I think we've gotten down to. So 2 to 3 inches from the terminal hole to the next terminal hole. And so that's extremely difficult because there's not much play when you get that short. But at the same time, if they just need a little jumper to make something happen, we can do it. The larger cable, you know, when you get into 4/0 and 1/0 and stuff, it's not as easy to go that short. But at the end of the day, we do our best to make sure if it's going to work for your system, we try to do it.
Is the short cable that you were just talking about, would that be like the application for that? Is that to attach maybe 2 batteries that are stacked next to, like, side by side, something like that?
Absolutely. And especially in a system where you're not running an inverter and you just have DC loads coming off it, something like a 4-gauge, just connecting, say, 2 Battle-Borns together. You know, the Battle-Borns, depending on how you orient them, you know, you could use a 1-footer, and that may be the perfect amount of space for your installation. There might be someone else who has, you know, them long ways, so to speak, instead of kind of smushed together. And so they've got 2 terminals that are right here. And so they want to make sure they can make that connection from terminal to terminal, you know, very, very short, because the longer your DC run is in your DC system, the less voltage efficiency you're going to have, regardless of your cable size. The longer the run, you can go all the way up to 4/0, but if it's too long of a run, you're still going to have voltage loss.
Okay, so the thicker the cable, I'm just trying to make sure I understand this correctly. So the thicker the cable, the longer the run can be without losing?
Correct. Now there's of course a limit to that. You know, you can of course jump up to 4/0 cable, but if you're still, you know, 20, 30 feet away from a battery bank to an inverter, you're going to see voltage loss, guaranteed. But you're going to see less than if you were using 4-gauge, if that makes sense. The analogy I like to use with my clients is a highway, right? Because if I'm using this, I'm on a 1-lane highway and my current's got to travel really far. They've got a long ways to go. There's just going to be more resistance in the system. Whereas if I go to, say, 4-aught, now I'm dealing with a 4-lane highway, there's a lot more room for my current to travel. There's less things getting away, less branches hanging over the freeway, knocking into that current and slowing it down, so to speak.
Oh, okay. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. And it's one note I did want to make about the flexibility of this, just because, again, I'm in sales, which means honesty for me is always up here. I don't want anyone to ever hear me say something and then go, well, you said this, right? So when we're talking about the flexibility of the cable, the more copper strands you have inside of this cable, the less flexible it's going to be. And so if you get a 4-aught cable, don't expect you're able to tie it up. You know what I mean? There's a lot more copper in there, but it is absolutely going to be more flexible than the majority of cable you're going to find on the industry. So I like just putting that disclaimer in there so I don't get 100 phone calls saying it's not as flexible as I thought it would be.
Okay. Do you have like a guide? So when we're talking about the thickness of the cable and the length of the cable, will somebody come to you and say, I want to run this cable this distance, and then you recommend to them what the thickness needs to be? Is that normally how it works? Is that the easiest way for it to work?
Absolutely. There's plenty of charts online. That's one of the reasons that we don't have a really heavy, custom cable designer or whatever you want to call it, where you punch in your distances and lengths and stuff, and it'll tell you what cable you need. There's just a lot of charts out there, and it's honestly very straightforward. If you look on our resellers website, Inverters Are Us, if you click on their inverter cables tab, there's actually just a very simple but absolutely correct platform that says, at 1500 watts, at 2000 watts, whatever your wattage is that maybe you're drawing off your system, because that's what I'm gauging your cable size off of. I'm not basing it off of, oh, you got 10 batteries versus 3 batteries. That doesn't make a huge difference for me as far as the actual cable size. Of course, there's a caveat to that, and we can get into that later. But at the end of the day, it's how much I'm drawing off that battery bank. And I want to make sure that, whatever the largest draw could be, which in most cases is an inverter, whatever that surge is, my cable is going to be able to handle it without melting or overheating. Again, when we talk about charging, when you've got 10 batteries versus 2 batteries, that makes a difference in some cable size because you got a lot more real estate you got to get those amps to. But again, at the end of the day, we're always basing it off how much I'm drawing off that system and making sure we're able to handle that.
Okay.
And so people that, I made my own cables when and they're certainly not nearly as flexible as the Spartan cables. But people that aren't confident in making their own, they could contact you guys, and you could, after some discussion, make the appropriate cables for them.
Absolutely. That's my bread and butter right there. If I was just selling cables all day, it'd be an easy job. But when we're building systems that's got cables, batteries, solar inverters, there's a lot more questions that go into it. I actually have a client that stopped in yesterday, and they just bought a small travel trailer for their family. They're going on road trips. They don't need anything massive, but they actually sent me an email list that says 18 inches of red, 2 gauge, 26 inches, blah, 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 and they'll actually dial it out. Now, I will say, as far as custom cable goes, we will get it as close to the dot as possible. When you say 22 inches, it's very possible that you'll get your cable, and from this hole to this hole is exactly on the dot 22 inches. But depending on the day, it may be a little bit off by, less than half an inch given. So that's one thing we just ask for some grace there. We do our best. But again, human error, sometimes things take place. The one thing that absolutely will be the same in our cables, guaranteed, is the quality. We are never going to skimp on that. Regardless of if it's a centimeter off on the exact length, we'll make sure that the copper is up to the top, so you're getting that efficient voltage through the cable. Some of the issues that folks that make them themselves have is that the copper itself will actually stop short of that terminal. They'll only have maybe a centimeter of copper in there, and that's just a very inefficient way, because ultimately the voltage is connecting all the way up here on your cable, and if the copper doesn't start until well down here, that's just not efficient. And so we make sure that our copper is exactly where it needs to be, and that's one thing that we are very proud of. We offer a lifetime crimp warranty on any of these cables that are coming out of our shop, even the custom ones. So we do sell some bulk cable. We sell some ring terminals and heat treats and things. Those are never going to have our crimp warranty on it because we didn't make it. So at the end of the day, that's something I'm super proud of. I'm able to tell clients, hey, when your kids are running these rigs, if there's a problem with the cables, call us, we'll get it fixed.
Yeah, lifetime warranty, that's pretty huge.
Absolutely.
You can't beat that.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I'm picking up from you, though, that I didn't really think about too much before we started talking to you is not just the flexibility, but it's actually the efficiency that's just as equally as important. And it kind of makes sense, I guess, when you're running systems in your RV, especially RVs, and you got a solar system and you're trying to capture as much power and retain that power, the cable is probably a pretty important component to that system to make sure that you are getting all the power that you can possibly get.
Yep. Early on in the industry, it was almost humorous. We'd get phone calls from folks that are saying your inverter's broken and it's not working. I don't know what's wrong with it. And I'll troubleshoot the system, figure out what's going on, because I'll be the first one to tell you, electronics break.
Yeah.
Flat out. You can have the best warranty, the most quality parts, the most, whatever you want to call it. But every once in a while, something's going to break, and it just happens. And so making sure you're prepared for that eventuality for anyone in the industry is great. But when we troubleshoot and someone's got a 5,000 watt inverter at 12 volts hooked up to 4 gauge, you're going to have some issue. And the reason that we say that is because every cable size, based on the amount of copper in there, is rated for a certain amount of amps, DC amps, that are actually traveling through it. And so if we put a draw through this cable that is overloading it, so to speak, 2 things are going to happen. One, you're going to get extreme overheat. So you actually can touch this cable and it's going to be very, very hot to the touch. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to have extreme voltage loss because you're trying to draw more than that cable's able to handle. And so what happens is they turn their inverter on, they try and run a microwave, say a 2,000 watt microwave off a 5,000 watt inverter. In theory, no problem. But if you're running 4 gauge cable, now all of a sudden all of those amps you need to get to that microwave are being held up by this. And that 1-lane highway is just not allowing that much current to travel through. And there you go. Your inverter is going to shut off after a second or two. And it's going to sound like something's broken because in theory, it should work, right? But yes, you're absolutely on the dot, Kenny, that the cable size matters much more into a system than some other components. Absolutely.
Okay.
What other products does Spartan Power provide?
Sure, absolutely. So at this point, we brought out a line of inverter chargers that, in my opinion, and again, I'm biased, I work for Spartan Power, or I sell their products, we're rock solid. I wish we had more on the shelf right now. We got completely cleaned out, and we just haven't been able to get them back in stock as of right now. We're about 90 days out from having our reshipment come back in and get us back in the game with the inverter chargers. So we've got an inverter charger line, anywhere from 2,200 watts. I believe we had a 6,600 watt. So a lot of spread there as far as what you're looking at as output, anywhere from 12 up to 48 volts. We do have a standard line of just pure sine wave inverters. We do not mess around with modified whatsoever. There's a lot of other companies out there that are doing it well, and it's just not something we feel the need to get into. We do sell some little odds and end gadgets. We've got a DC battery meter that you can actually hook up into your battery bank, similar to the Victron without the price tag. And you'll be able to see on a small screen, 9 different data points of what's happening inside your battery bank. So that unit's great. And especially for folks that want to know what's happening in their batteries, but just don't have the ability to be dropping, a couple $100 on a battery monitor. So that's one. We do have a PM120. That's a power usage meter. The power usage meter is actually a lot of fun. We helped design with Inverters R Us back in the day what's called their energy audit. They said we need a more formulated way to start at A and be able to create a system from scratch. So someone calls and says, I have a brand new RV. I need batteries, cabling, inverters, solar. Help. And we're like, oh my gosh, there's a lot that goes into that. And so we created this energy audit system that has folks walk through and say, plug in your microwave, plug in your TV, hair dryer, coffee pot, whatever it is you want to be able to run when you're not plugged into shore power, figure out how many watts it's pulling. And some folks are working with power equipment, drills and saws that they don't have the user manual for the last 20 years, but it still works. And they're like, how do I know how much power this is using? And so the power meter, I wish I had one. We're actually out of stock on that. Again, supply chain issues, but we're bringing those in too. The power meter just plugs into a standard wall. and then you plug your product into the power meter, and anything less than 15 amps, it'll show up and it'll tell you this is pulling, 10 amps on surge, then it drops down closer to 6 for continuous run. It'll give you amps, it'll give you watts. There's actually some algorithms in there that you can calculate history. And so you can plug in, say, a freezer for a week, and then you go back to our PM120 and it'll tell you for this week, you drew X amount of power, which if you calculate how much your power is costing you, you can actually figure out, hey, you just spent $300 on powering your fridge, or whatever it was. So it's got a lot of cool features, but the main one for me is just being able to tell how many watts is X pulling, because that makes a heck of a difference when we're sizing. Do you need 3 batteries or do you need 6?
Yeah.
I saw that power meter on your website, and I was wondering how it worked, and because I didn't realize that you actually plug what you want to measure into that after it's in your outlet. Okay, that makes a lot of sense then, yeah.
Yeah, it's basically just a gateway that's able to measure what's happening, going through it. So pretty handy unit. I know Inverters R Us was actually handing them out as free gifts for some orders. I think Battleborn batteries, you actually got a free PM120 when you were purchasing them. I don't think they're running that promotion anymore, but there's a lot of folks who've called in and said, this is great. Now I know what's going on with my system. I'm able to actually, critique what I want versus, hey, this is what I have, and now I have to build my habits around that. And that's what, we really worked for with Spartan Power, was making sure that the systems that we're a part of, we're not just building a system that says you can run, 1,000 watts, good luck. We want to make sure that if you've got a fridge that you need to keep running 24/7, your kids want to watch TV for 2 or 3 hours a night, your wife's got a hair dryer, whatever the situation is, we want to make sure your system works for you, not the other way around.
It sounds like a good way to save money, because you'll understand the scale that you need. You'll be able to scale your system accordingly and maybe not overspend on, maybe you don't need 4 batteries, maybe you can do it with 3. Maybe you don't need 6 solar panels, you can do it with 4. And something like that. So in the long run, it probably save you money and time, effort, and all that.
And that energy audit, it takes maybe an hour or two once you know how to work with it. It does take some time to calculate it out, because we don't want to ever sell a system and have someone go, well, I'm actually only getting 4 hours when I assumed I'd be getting 8. That's the worst phone call in the world you can get. We just bought 3 batteries for you. We bought an inverter, solar panels, and we're not getting the runtime we assumed. And we got those phone calls and we're like, well, let's figure out what's happening here. And those are generally when folks are using their own batteries and pairing our inverters with them and just saying, well, your inverter must be broken. It's drawing my batteries down way too fast. And well, when you're pulling 2,000 watts an hour, that's around the equivalent of 160 DC amps per hour. So, at the end of the day, if you've got a couple Battleborns in there, you're going to have some runtime, absolutely. But it all depends on how many watts we're pulling off it. And that's where the energy audit, like you said, will save people money, save people heartache, and more than anything, just make sure that their system is sustainable and reliable. Absolutely.
Let's talk about inverters for a minute. Really is a confusing subject, I think, in the RV community on when do I need an inverter and when is an inverter not necessary?
Absolutely. So the inverter's main purpose, simply put, is to take DC power and give you AC. And so if you just want to picture that bridge that's able to tie into a battery, right? We can't contain AC alternating current inside of a battery. It bounces around too much, the polarities would be reversing. It just can't be contained, so to speak. However, it's much more efficient at running products of a higher load, right? And so that's why folks don't just run everything DC. It would make sense that you've got every product in your entire rig running off your batteries, save yourself some money, you never have to buy an inverter. Logically, sure. But at the end of the day, when you're running a water heater, a microwave, all of these large appliances that are surging 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 watts, there's really no way that that battery bank, unless you buy a lot of them, are going to be able to handle that when using direct current. And so that's when an inverter comes into play, where you're able to use the stored DC current in your battery bank and give you that AC power that's able to surge a lot higher, get some of those appliances that are much larger up and running. So that's really when you make that decision. I've got an AC appliance, say something as simple as a coffee pot, that I want to be able to run when I'm not plugged in anywhere. We talk to a lot of folks who are full-time RVers But Monday through Friday, they're in an RV park, they're plugged in, they're working, whatever job they're running to be able to pay for it. They're working on their YouTube channel. And then on the weekends, they'll go out to a spot and they'll go biking, they'll go hunting, fishing, hiking, whatever it is that they do on their weekend time. And so when they're not plugged into shore power, what do you want to be able to run? Does it have a 3-prong plug on it? You probably need an inverter.
Oh, okay. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
That's probably an easy way to look at it, right?
Absolutely. And we'll get folks that say, well, I've got a little, cigarette outlet in my car. I want to be able to run stuff off of that. The issue that folks run into, again, is just how much power you're drawing. At most, when we're talking about amps, this is one thing that's a lot of fun, is AC amps versus DC amps. And that light bulb for my clients is humongous to be able to make the difference of, am I talking about DC amp draw or AC amp draw? That cigarette outlet in your car is going to be able to provide about 10 DC amps for you. And so in the equivalent realm, you're maybe getting 100 watts out of it. Some of them, they'll have an upgraded outlet there. You're maybe getting close to 150 watts out of it. The issue comes in, you get an inverter that's rated for 300 watts, you plug it into that outlet, you're not able to run 250 watts worth of appliance, and you think something's broken. And that's when the conversation of, nope, you got to directly tie into a 12-volt battery. That's where that conversation comes in. A lot of trailers will have 12-volt batteries already built in for sensors, some lights, things like that. And so most folks either try and limit their usage to what those built-in batteries can handle, or they just upgrade the system entirely if they know for a fact, I am going to be boondocking more often, I'm going to be traveling more often, not plugged into shore power, and I want to be able to run my coffee pot.
And then you also mentioned an inverter charger. How's that different from an inverter?
So back in the day, the earliest kind of industry idea around how to set these RVs and systems up was to have an inverter that you can run your power through, turn it off. It's not giving you any AC power. It's not drawing off your batteries. In order to charge your batteries when you're plugged into shore power, they would install a converter. Now, a lot of rigs still are being produced with converters in them. And they work really, really well, especially for the folks of the mindset of, the less products built into each other, the less things that can break. I talk to a lot of folks that say, I want everything isolated. So if my inverter breaks, I still have my charger. If my charger breaks, I still have my inverter. And that makes sense. There's a lot of thought behind why people do what they do. In my opinion, though, the inverter charger is absolutely the revolutionary side of these systems. It's less things to install. Generally, you can get them for a little bit cheaper. And the biggest benefit is it actually has a larger charger most of the time. For example, if you take one of our Spartan inverter chargers, basically what happens is you take your inverter, you take your converter, you mush them together. So there's less things that you have to install. There's less wires you have to run. There's less actual footprints of products in your rig because space is everything in some of these installs. And so it really ties it in. Now, the key is what's called an automatic transfer switch. Inverter chargers across the board, I personally don't know of one that doesn't have an automatic transfer switch. All that does is there's a simple relay in there that when you don't have shore power, it's pulling juice off your batteries. As soon as shore power comes in, it stops working off your batteries, cuts them off completely, and allows that shore power to bypass through the output and still run your entire rig. So the main difference that folks have to get around in their head is how things are being wired. Because a lot of the times, the converter itself is actually tied in to the shore power line. And so when you plug into shore power, the original is actually going to be charging those batteries. Whereas when we get an inverter charger, that shore power is going to be running directly through your inverter to be able to charge those batteries as well. Because as soon as that AC shows up, whether that's generator, shore power, whatever it is, it'll stop pulling off your batteries. As soon as there's a leftover amount, it'll start charging them. I say the leftover amount because it's always prioritizing your loads. There's pretty much every inverter charger on the market is going to say, hey, you want to run 2,000 watts worth of a microwave, coffee pot, whatever it is that you're running. We're going to pass through all of this incoming shore power to make sure your loads are happy. Whatever's left over, it's going to go back into your battery bank.
And then going back to efficiency a little bit, Steve, having an inverter converter in one unit, does I mean, in my mind, it sounds like that would be more efficient than having two separate units, more wiring and stuff like that. Is that true, or is
Absolutely.
it is? Okay.
In my opinion, and I will say this, everyone who's been in the industry much longer than I have, clearly I'm a little bit younger than some of the folks who've been doing this for decades, right? In my opinion, it makes absolute sense to have the inverter charger. For me, it's because of the larger charger. A lot of the converters you're actually going to find on the market are going to max out right around 55 amps. You may see some larger ones out there, but you're paying for them, absolutely. And of course, you're paying to wire them, you're paying to install them, you're paying for all that kind of stuff. Whereas the built-in inverter chargers, you're looking at anywhere from, say a 2,000 watt inverter charger. I think the Victron Compact has like a 70 amp charger in there, I want to say. Their 3000 VA Victron Multi Plus has a 120 amp charger built in there. And so when we're talking about a group of 6 Battleborns powering an inverter, having 120 amps that we can throw at them if we need to is always going to be more beneficial than 55 amps. Because again, we're talking DC amps that's recharging those batteries. And if those batteries are low, if those batteries need to be topped off because you're running a generator, we want to try and do it efficiently and as quickly as possible so that you're not burning gas. We want to make sure that that charger is actually worth something. And a lot of the converters that are built in are just much smaller amps, which just takes longer to get things recharged.
You just said something that really clicked when you said about charging off a generator, wasting gas, because if the charger is maxing out at a certain level, that generator's running regardless. So it might take you twice as long,
Absolutely,
using twice the amount of fuel to charge something. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I never thought about it that way.
And again, the wiring, I mean, we're getting into a little bit of nitty gritty here, which I'm all for. That's my job, 9 to 5. But the nitty gritty of it is, how is this being wired? Because some folks that have a trailer that's completely bare, that's completely scratched, got no appliances in it, the inverter charger route makes a lot of sense. It's much easier to wire. Everything is flowing through that single unit, meaning it's much easier to know what's happening in your system. When you've got multiple parts to your system that are doing multiple different functions, you kind of have to hop around to each individual component and say, what is this doing? What is that doing? How are these playing nice together? That kind of a thing. Whereas when everything's operating out of an inverter charger, you have the ability to go directly to that unit. If you're plugged into shore power, and it's going to tell you, we're charging at this is the rate we're charging at, this is the load you're drawing off of me, and everything's kind of condensed right there for you. But again, it always comes down to wiring. And it does make sense for some folks to stick with a converter and a separate inverter just because of how it's wired.
And then what ranges do you guys sell? Like, is a 1,000 watt inverter the smallest, up to what?
Sure. So as far as pure sine wave, not inverter chargers, we do have a 300 watt up to a 2,000 watt. Honestly, the 300 watt unit is perfect for charging laptops, things like that. There is a cigarette lighter adapter that you can plug in to the cigarette lighter. You're going to get a max of that 100 watts we already talked about, but most laptops are pulling 85 to 90 watts. Cell phones are pulling much less than that. Any of those smaller appliances will work just fine off that 300. Now, as soon as you start talking about stacking, say, hey, I want to watch TV and charge a laptop, or watch TV and run a dish box, then you got to start looking at something larger. So we go 300, 1,000, 1,500, and 2,000. And those are just pure sine wave inverters. Your DC hookup, you plug into the inverter. They do include a little remote, which is really handy depending on where some folks install it. That's a cool feature to have as well. As far as our inverter charger line, I don't know exactly what we're getting in on this next shipment, but in the past we had a 2200, 3300, 4400, and 6600. The reason I love that extra little bit, right? Because you'll commonly see 3000, 4000, 5000. I was thrilled when I saw 22, because at the end of the day, there's a loss of efficiency on inverters by about 10%. And that's across the board on any brand. You talk to Victron Energy, you're not getting 3,000 watts out of their Multi Plus 12-3000. It's not happening. It has that surge capability for a little bit. And depending if you're using power assist and all that, you can get into a lot more conversations there. But just straight inverting, you're not getting 3,000 watts. There's going to be a loss of efficiency on even our inverters. And so when you see 2200, that means you're getting pretty close to your 2,000 running watts, which I think is great. When you start looking at a coffee pot that's pulling 1,500 and a TV that's pulling 100, you got a laptop, you got a cell phone, and that's just your morning. You're watching the news, answering emails, charging your phone for the day, and making a cup of joe. Well, that's 2,000 watts. So at the end of the day, making sure that we've got enough power for what people need to do for their lifestyle, that's what we're all about.
And the warranty on your inverter, sorry, Sean.
Absolutely. So the inverter warranty is 2 years. You know, at the end of the day, the one thing I like to say is that a manufacturer error most commonly will show up within the first 30 to 60 cycles. If there's a problem with the internal control board, if there's a problem with the GFCI outlets or anything like that, most commonly, it's going to show up, like I said, within the first 30 to 60 cycles of that system. A lot of folks like having longer warranties. I absolutely agree that if a company's telling you, hey, it's warranted for this many years and it's longer than mine, that's awesome. I love it. But again, at the end of the day, it might not be worth an extra 500, 600 bucks just because of a warranty. Because at the end of the day, that manufacturer error that is going to be covered under said warranty is going to show up sooner rather than later. Absolutely.
Okay.
And then jumping around just a little bit again, a lot of people that do have RVs and are upgrading their battery systems and going to an inverter charger, they're also considering solar panels as well.
Absolutely.
And that cabling is a little bit different, a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And then, so do you guys get involved in that at all?
We are branching out into that. Absolutely. We're very excited. We are currently in the vetting phase of some MC4 connectors, different types of solar and cable, as you mentioned. It's a much smaller gauge. Most commonly, you're seeing 10 gauge coming off the panels. The MC4 is probably one of the most standard solar connections. You're also seeing things like SAE from Zamp Solar. You're seeing Anderson connections. I actually just came across this new Duracell power generator wall thing. I forget the exact name for it. They're selling at Costco, and it has an Anderson connection you can plug up to 100 watts of solar into. And so there's a lot of companies that are just saying, we've got connections, we want to make it a little bit unique so people have to come back to us, right? And so that's one of the fun things in the solar world, is just being able to say, which connections are you working with? Let's figure out how to make this happen for you. And so we are currently in the quality control process, making sure that the MC4 parts we're getting, regardless of if we're ordering 10,000 or a million of them, they're the same quality, they're the same style, that they're all going to work together. We just want to make sure before we sell something that it actually works and we can still slap our warranty on it.
Oh, okay.
So now, are you helping people build, like if somebody has an RV and they want to build an entire solar system?
Sure.
Solar system doesn't sound right, but like from the solar to everything, are you guys helping them throughout the entire process?
We've done it all. Absolutely. Okay. So I've had many builds under my belt where it's literally from scratch. We bought a trailer, it has nothing in it. Okay. We want to be able to run this. We walk them through the energy audit process based on, and when we're talking about solar, we always want to figure out what's your nighttime usage and your daytime. Because if we're adding solar in, we want to make sure that if you're putting solar on it, it's actually recharging your batteries from what you use during the night, and not just 50% of that, right? We want to make sure that it's actually working for your system. And so we've done everything from one battery, one small inverter, one small solar panel, just being able to charge an electric bike battery, all the way up to running air conditioners for a couple hours, things like that. So it's a lot of fun. Like I said, we talk to a wide variety of folks that are looking from anything from, hey, I've got a couple batteries, should I keep them, should I upgrade, to I need everything, can you help me?
And you also do sell batteries through your company, right?
So at this point, we don't have a direct line of Spartan Power batteries. We're hopeful that might come into fruition down the road. But at the end of the day, we always have inverters or us that we can go through for batteries as well.
Oh, okay.
And so that's what we would base a lot of our calculations off of, is actually Battleborn's batteries. Okay. If folks say lithium, that's generally the one we're pointing them towards, just because we trust that if Battleborn batteries is in the system, that I'm not going to have to worry about the batteries going bad. You know what I mean? There's a lot of parts of these systems that if aren't treated correctly, they're going to cause some problems. Batteries is absolutely, in my opinion, the lifeblood of your system. It's what's contained all of your juice. So if you've got solar panels but bad batteries, it doesn't matter if you've got 1,000 watts of solar or 100 watts of solar. Your batteries can't hold it. They can't hold it. And likewise, if you want to be able to run my 10,000 watt inverter, but if your batteries aren't there, it's not going to run it. The batteries are most important part of the system half the time.
Yeah, a popular question that we get is, what can we run off of our solar? And I always tell people pretty much nothing. The solar panels just charge the batteries, and then after that, everything's really running off the power of the battery. So
exactly.
I definitely agree that the battery's the lifeline of the whole system.
And it's really cool because you look at, and I love how you fit in lifeline with batteries. Good one right there. As you well know, AGM lifelines are some of the biggest batteries in the game. So nice one. As far as what we're talking about here with solar powering stuff, I will say that, Victron Energy has, I believe it's in their 7510, 7515, and their 120 MPPTs. I'm probably missing one in there. But they do have a really small load output that you can connect to. That's always a secondary priority for the charge controller. But you can plug in something that's maybe running 1 or 2 DC amps off of it. And as long as your batteries are receiving the correct type of charge, it'll be able to run a small light, small fan, whatever it is. But you're 100% correct that there is in no way, shape, or form any system that I would design that I'm going to tell you hook up X appliance to your solar panels. It's always got to be running through a charge controller and then off that charge controller into your battery bank, because otherwise we're either wasting power, it's not efficient power, and more often than not, it's not consistent power. And that's where the Victron MPPT really came into shine, is how consistent that charge, how consistent they're able to make that charge going into your battery banks. And that was one of the biggest issues with PWMs across the board, is they were just kind of inefficient. They were taking power, there was inconsistent that was coming out of it. Not all brands given, there's excellent PWMs out there. But at the end of the day, those MPPTs really kind of streamlined that system and made sure whatever's coming out of your panels is efficiently charging those batteries to the best of its ability.
Do you deal with Victron products at all?
Absolutely. Only because they're the biggest name in the industry right now. Okay. We'll pick up the phone and half the time we're selling cables to Victron systems. And so just being able to answer those questions, being able to say, yes, you need a 3/8 ring terminal on the smart shunt side, but a 5/16 on the battery side, we're familiar with them. Absolutely.
Okay. So if people don't necessarily have a Spartan inverter, but they're using Victron, they can call you and you're able to speak the language.
I do my best, right? That's the one thing I like to say, is that I've been doing this for a couple years now, and I learn something new every day. At the end of the day, as human beings, I think we all should be learning something, whether it's in your work industry, personal life, whatever it is. We all should be learning, right? But for me, I have not showed up to work one day in the last year and not walked away saying, I didn't know that. And that's not a bad thing. We are the first people to say, I don't know the answer to that, but let's figure it out. You know what I mean? Because there's too many folks in not just this industry, but business as a whole, that are willing to say, well, just buy that. Well, just buy that. It'll work. Just buy that. And for me, it's like, why would, as a company, why would I want to do that, to my owner of this company and just say, well, you're going to get a return in 2 weeks because I had no idea what he was talking about, but I made a sale. You know what I mean? That doesn't help anyone. And so for me, the Victron products, the coolest part of it is, of course, that, they've got a 5-year warranty on everything that goes out the door, which for me is huge. Again, if there's a manufacturer error, it's going to show up. But the fact is, those Victrons, they've got such an internal system there. They've got their GX devices that you can tie everything together. They've got programming in their inverter chargers. They've got settings that you can change in your MPPTs all off your cell phone. I mean, it's just mind-blowing what they're doing with this stuff, and it's honestly exciting to be a part of being able to build those systems. As much as we love Victron products, I love it even more when someone comes to me to put Spartan Power cables in conjunction with Victron products, because I know they're working with the best of the best.
And what is there any, I have never thought about this until just now, but is there any like preventive maintenance or some type of preventive care that you want to do to your cables that to keep them to make them last longer?
Sure. In essence, making sure they're sized right out of the gate is going to help with that. A lot of times when folks are having issues with cables corroding or just not looking good after a couple of years is because they're overheating them. At the end of the day, they're just not running the correct size cable from the get-go. And that, of course, is just going to cause long-term detriment to the cable itself. The one thing I like to say about our cables specifically, however, is that they are up here, it is completely copper in this ring terminal, but it is coated in zinc to make sure that we're not getting that rust factor, that we're not getting any of the moisture factor. We get a lot of folks in humid areas. We just want to make sure that, we're trying to keep their systems as clean as possible. And so I always recommend at least once a month, depending on if you're living in the rig or if you're just vacationing. If you're living in it full time, at least once a month, go in and check all of those connections. Make sure that any bolt that's touching one of our cables is nice and tight. That's going to help avoid any arcs in your system, any melting or burn marks throughout the system. And ultimately, if an arc is large enough, it'll cause a surge, run up your system, pop some fuses. If you don't have a fuse, pop your inverter or whatever other loads you're running. That's bad news for everyone. And so right now, just making sure things are nice and tight. Of course, trying to avoid any type of moisture in any type of DC system is beneficial to everyone involved. As far as actual upkeep goes, honestly, no. They're very straightforward. The insulation that we're using does a great job of protecting it as long as we've got it sized correctly.
Okay.
I've seen folks that actually had a cat, believe it or not, that was actually playing with their battery cables. They had their battery cables underneath the couch. They were doing something with the batteries, and there was a cat that was actually coming in. I think the cable looked something like this, and the cat would come in and just smack it, and it would kind of tilt like this and then come back, and tilt like this and come back. And they said after 2 or 3 weeks of seeing their cat do that, the terminals got really loose. What it was connected to got extremely loose. And then all of a sudden they were getting inconsistent readings on their battery monitors. They were getting inconsistent outputs on their inverters. And it's all because this terminal was not connected to the batteries as tight as it should have been. And that voltage just was really inefficient.
Wow.
Yeah, I never thought about the connections because I'm now thinking about all the driving that we do with our RVs and how terrible the road system, terrible the roads are.
Well, and the one thing I will say, it all depends on what we're using to actually connect these things together. Battleborn's got some beautiful posts that they, the bolt posts that they include with their leaf posts on their batteries. I've honestly never heard of something like that just falling off due to use or due to driving down the road. That's never happened. But, again, we're seeing everything from a cheap inverter bought off a store shelf, modified, for $60, that who knows what kind of parts they're putting on the back end to help keep it tight. And so just that encouragement of check your connections. If you've got an issue, check your connections and then call me. You know what I mean? Because half the time it's something as simple as a wire that came loose, a wire that was in that wrong place, something like that. But, it always depends on the quality of products that we're actually utilizing these things with. Everything has to play nice with one another. You can't spend, a couple $1,000s on batteries and then skimp out on the rest of your system. You're still going to have some issues. At the end of the day, if you've got nice batteries, you're 50% there, but there's a lot of wiggle room that you can go wrong too. So,
one piece I found that's overlooked a lot is the fuses, and not just the fuses, but the fuse holders.
Sure.
Some of them can't, when you're putting a lot of amperage through those, some of those holders are not built for that kind of heat and power, and they can actually melt as well. So,
Absolutely.
People really need to pay attention to that too.
And kind of going off of that as well, it was funny when I started working in this industry, it's very simple to say you got an X size inverter, this is the X size fuse you need. And so I have that chart, I have that cheat sheet, people call me, I got this inverter, well, this is the fuse, you're good to go. Our fuse kits, we do sell Spartan Power A&L fuse kits, kind of similar to like what you would refer to as a leaf blade. So you've got 2 posts that you connect a cable to this side, and there's a fuse that runs in between. If that fuse pops, you just replace it. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Honestly, a very, very cost efficient alternative to some other options out there. The one thing I will say is though, voltage, the DC voltage in your system makes a huge difference in what type of fuse you need. Because if I'm running 12 volt system with 5,000 watts or 48 volt system with 5,000 watts, well, my fuse size is going to change. But you're absolutely correct that if we're not sizing those things correctly, you're going to see that holder itself, where those cables are connecting to, you're going to see melting, overheating, you're going to see burn marks, all kinds of stuff will come from that. So you're absolutely on point.
And you guys have those as well.
Absolutely. So we actually just released a new line of our fuse blocks. Super excited, super slick. I don't have one here with me. I wish I did to give you a sneak peek, but we're very excited. We sell just the fuse blades themselves and the actual kit. And so one unique thing that I think about our company is we actually sell a kit 1 and a kit 2. The reason we have 2 different kits, the kit 1 is just the fuse, the block, so the actual base you're installing, screwing in, putting the fuse in there, and then the shield that covers over your cables. So that's the kit 1. The kit 2 actually includes 1 foot of positive cable with it. So depending on what size fuse you get, the cable size will increase or decrease. But the reason we do that is so when you get a fuse, you can just drop your terminal here onto the battery, top this side onto the fuse kit, and then run whatever cable you had already been running over to your battery directly to the other side of the fuse. It makes it nice and simple for everyone. But along the lines of customization, we've also taken some systems that are extremely tight and extremely cramped and cut, say, a 1 footer in half so that they've got 6 inches to go to their battery and another 6 inches to go to their load or bus bar or whatever it needs to be. So we've seen all sorts of variations with it, but that kit 2 is very straightforward and makes it super simple for a majority of systems.
Getting off topic just a little bit, Steve.
Absolutely. I'm all about rabbit trails. Let's do this.
Okay. You were telling us before we start recording about a Prius system for off-grid use. So this isn't really RV related, but that you guys are able to like kind of reverse that system, similar to how the F-150 Lightning was just announced that it's going to be coming out and how it's going to power a house. But you guys have been doing this already for I don't know how long, but you were telling us that you could get a Prius to power like a cabin out in the woods or your off-grid system. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I found that really interesting, and I wonder who knows about that.
Yeah, so most folks in California do. The reason I say that is sadly just with the wildfires that have been going on, a lot of folks are just getting these blackouts, and they're saying, hey, in order to make sure we're not causing more fires, in order to get power where it needs to be, you're not gonna have power for 3 hours, 3 days, whatever it is. And so a lot of folks were looking into alternatives other than a generator. One, you don't want to have a lot of gasoline laying around a fire. That's just never a good idea. Two, it's loud and it's noisy. It's producing fumes. And so if you guys have to stay in a closed location, we want to make sure that we're not smoking anyone out, especially if you've got kids around, that kind of stuff. And so that's where the inverter comes into play. All you need to get an inverter system to work is a 12 volt or whatever DC voltage you require, 12 volt battery, the correct cables, and an inverter. Now, figuring out what size you need, that's why I have a job, right? But the simple gist of it is you need a battery, you need the cables, you need the inverter. And so most Priuses or hybrid vehicles, I don't necessarily want to say that the Toyota Prius alone has been our only setup. We've done tons of hybrid stuff. But at the end of the day, we'll connect to the 12 volt starting battery. We can't connect to the traction battery. There's too many volts back there. You're going to fry your inverter immediately, or it's just not going to work for you, one of the two. So at the end of the day, what we're doing here is when we hook up to that 12 volt battery, it itself is being recharged by that traction battery in the back. So even though it's got, however many miles that it can run off the battery bank, now all of that juice there is coming into your starting battery and actually help recharge it as we're drawing it down with whatever our loads are. The one caveat to all of this, the 12 volt starting batteries in hybrid vehicles are extremely small. And we already touched on this a little bit, is the amp hour capacity, the battery bank capacity. That if you don't have enough juice in that battery, you're not going to be able to power these massive, massive loads. And so we have been able to run on most systems, we've gotten away with about 1,000 watts. That's kind of the safe line for us is we've set up some systems with a 1,500 watt inverter, with a 1,200 watt inverter, but always telling them, please don't try and run more than 1,000 watts. If you've got a refrigerator that's pulling 300, you want to watch TV and get the news of what's going on, charge some cell phones to stay in touch, whatever it is, that's awesome. But don't expect to be running an air conditioner off of this. Don't expect to be running your coffee pot that's pulling 2,000 watts or a microwave. That system's just not designed to do it. And so it is really that hybrid system that we've discussed is really designed around making sure that those essential needs, making sure your meat in your freezer doesn't go bad, or your milk in the fridge doesn't go bad, whatever it is. I had a client who actually would go around, he'd plug in his fridge for an hour, he'd unplug his fridge and plug in his freezer for an hour. He didn't want to overload his vehicle, he didn't want to overload that battery system, but he wanted to make sure he had versatility. And so that's just what he did. And so there's a lot of folks, they'll call and say, well, we want to be able to run XYZ off our car. Not going to happen. You're not going to run a 5,000 watt inverter off of the 12 volt starting battery. Even some of these big Super Duty trucks we're seeing out here, you're still not going to be able to run a 5,000 watt load off of a single 12 volt battery. It's just not going to happen. And so we've actually designed plenty of systems that have the starting battery tied in to a secondary house battery in the back of a truck or the back of a work vehicle, similar to locksmith vans. And they're actually able to run an inverter, a much larger inverter, in the back of the van with the secondary system, but still utilizing the alternator charge coming off that starting battery. So we've seen, like I said, we could go on for days about some of the systems we've designed, but there's some really unique folks out there that call and say, I want to do this, let's figure out how to do it. And with our knowledge of how our products work and their knowledge of what they want to do, we've been able to create some amazing systems, everything from these hybrid systems being able to help folks in a complete blackout situation, all the way to just massive systems in the middle of nowhere where they're able to run cabins off, they've got 2 air conditioners, a window unit and a roof unit, they've got TVs, microwaves, cooktops, everything being ran off an inverter, solar panels, and battery bank. It's absolutely amazing.
That's awesome.
And what's the benefit or the downside or the pluses of running from a 12 volt, a 24 volt, or a 48 volt?
I love this question. I knew it was coming up. So at this point, the one thing I will say is when you do the actual calculations of a 12 volt draw versus a 24 volt draw, there is efficiency. I want to make sure that's clear. There is absolutely efficiency from dropping a 12 volt system up to a 24 volt system, because the actual load you're drawing off that battery is less. It's about cut in half. So if I've got 100 watts coming off of a 12 volt system and 100 watts coming off a 24 volt system, there's literally a half mark where my 24 volt system is being drawn down by half or less than what my 12 volt is producing. The issue that folks run into is there's not a lot of affordable 24 volt and 48 volt batteries on the market. What that means is you're now purchasing 12 volt batteries, hooking them up in series to get to your 24 or 48 volt batteries. The issue when we hook batteries up in series is that we are increasing the voltage. So I've got 2 12 volt batteries, I hook them in series, which is positive to negative. Now I've got 2 batteries that are acting as a 24 volt bank with the same amount of amp hours. And so if I've got a 100 amp hour 12 volt battery and I hook 200 amp hour 12 volt batteries in series, I still only have 24 volts at 100 amp hours. And so that's the issue. You're spending just as much money on multiple batteries, and yes, you're getting half the efficiency, but you're also getting half the actual capacity of that battery bank. Right. And so if you're able to find a 24 volt or 48 volt battery for a good price, absolutely more efficient. The issue is it's just not affordable. There's not a lot of options out there yet. I say that because there's a lot of folks who see that and are going to try and fill that gap here sooner or later. The other issue folks can run into is trying to recharge those battery banks that are put in series. If you've got multiple 12 volt batteries, there's a lot of cells in there we got to try and equalize and make sure are getting the same exact balanced charge. And so now you're talking about putting battery balancers in the system. You're talking about measuring the system a little bit more closely to make sure that the first battery over here that's tied in series to the fourth battery over here, that the cells in there are still balanced the same way. And so that just adds a little bit more confusion. I've had a lot of folks who like the idea of hiring voltage because there's you can also get away with smaller cable. That's another benefit that some folks will throw at you. If I'm running a 12 volt, 5,000 watt system, I have to use 4-aught, and I probably, might go even bigger or add an additional cable in there to make sure just based on my loads. Whereas if I get a 5,000 watt inverter with a 48 volt system, I could probably get away with something closer to 1-aught. Just because there's less actual current because of the higher voltage that's got traveling through there.
Okay. So that's why you see these little thin wires when you're working with like the 120 volt, like your normal outlet. And that's why those wires are so small, so flexible. The higher the voltage, the smaller the cable can be.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense.
Exactly. Right. And so, I mean, at this point, one thing I like to just share with all folks is that DC does not travel as well as AC. And so DC current just doesn't travel as well as AC current. And so if you have to build a system where you've got distance, you've got a refrigerator over there, and this is the only spot you can put your system, try and keep your DC as tight as possible and run an extension cord over to your refrigerator out of your inverter. Because if you put all that distance in DC, the voltage, the lower voltage, the volume of that current, the amps in there, all that stuff that I'm not scientifically smart enough to be able to explain exactly, it's just not as efficient as running AC that farther distance. Oh, okay. But you're absolutely correct. As soon as I get that higher voltage on the DC side, it's traveling more efficiently. Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, one caveat that I will throw in, again, just kind of for the solar guys out there. There's a lot of folks that want to say you have to put your solar panels in series. If you don't put your solar panels in series, you're losing efficiency. And we have actually found that to not be 100% true. I will agree that there is absolute benefit. If I've got 4 panels in front of me, all of them the equivalent of a 12 volt panel, if I leave them all in parallel, I'm still only dealing with 12 volts. And as we just discussed, it's not traveling as efficiently as a 24 volt system. But if I put all 4 of those panels in series, now I'm dealing with 48 volts. 1 unit of 4 panels at 48 volts. Problem being, if this 4th panel gets shade on it, even a little bit of shade, you know, that safety bar that runs around the top of an RV, if that 1 inch of shade hits the 4th panel, the 1st panel in line is going to be similarly affected. More sensitive to the sun, it's going to start charging earlier, more sensitive to the sun, more sensitive to shade. And so in our opinion, the best way we can set up solar panels is series and parallel. Going too high on the voltage, putting too many panels in series together, is absolutely going to cause some issues. It's more affected by shade, more affected by actual cloud cover, so you're not going to get the full efficiency if there's any of those factors in play. And it's not really worth it for some folks to say, well, it's going to be a little bit more cloudy today, let me go rearrange my panels. A lot of folks want to just have it set up in the most efficient way, regardless of what they're dealing with. And so if I had 4 panels, I put these 2 in series, these 2 in series, and parallel that together. I've got a 24-volt system that's going to be more efficient than the 12, but not as affected by shade on this group of 2, because this group of 2 will still be firing away no problem.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You said it's a good day when you learn something. Man, I am learning a ton today.
I love it. Well, that means I'm doing my job correctly. You know what I mean?
So where can people go to take a look at your products and maybe see what you guys have to offer and figure out a way to get in contact with you?
Absolutely. So you can call us at any time. We do have phone numbers that are active 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We do have emails that are up and active. The easiest way to get in contact with me is go to my website, spartanpower.com. Figure out what you have a question about. If there's a specific product, that always helps my guys be able to say, okay, here's what I know, we're tying it into something else. That's beneficial because then we can tell you this product won't work, but maybe this one will. And so just go to my website, look around. There's a lot of information on there as well. But by all means, give us a call. The one thing I do want to say right now, and in our industry as a whole, is please just be patient. You know, whether you talk to us, whether you talk to Battleborn, any company out there is going to tell you we are busy. And that's a good thing. You know, we're not trying to say, please don't call us, we're too busy for your call. That's not it at all. It's just saying every single time I pick up the phone, whether it's a 5-minute $5 sale or an hour-long $10,000 sale, or swap that. I've had an hour-long $5 sale and I've had a 5-minute $10,000 sale. You know what I mean? Yeah. Regardless of what I pick up, we're going to spend the time we need to talking to you, making sure that the answers you are looking for are presented in a way you actually understand. I've had many folks that say, you're the 3rd person I've talked to, and I finally actually understand, and I don't feel like I have to go do more research. And that's just because we're willing to take the time. You know, that's a little bit of an argument when we talk to supervisors, and they're like, well, we need more phone calls being taken. Yes, but honestly, we also need more phone calls being answered. We need folks to come to us, get their answers, and feel confident to proceed, not just be waiting in limbo, still trying to figure out what parts they require. So I'd rather spend 30 minutes on the phone with someone and get them what they need so that they can continue with their build, they can get, you know, installed whatever they need to, rather than 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, 3 or 4 times throughout the week. So that's the way we do it. So I just say, please be patient. If you're in hold or in the queue for a while, it's because we're helping someone else, guaranteed. We don't just sit on our butts around here. Similar to anyone else in this industry, we are busier than we ever could be, and that's awesome. Because, you know, that means people are using these products for good things, you know, getting out into this beautiful world we have. I mean, I will never take that away from anyone. That is everyone's, you know, right to be able to go explore. If you want to go travel across the world, if you want to go, I mean, I've had vans show up that came from Africa. You know, they put their van on a barge and they showed up in Reno, and that van was just in Africa. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it blows my mind how many of these systems we get to come into contact with and meet amazing people like you guys. So it's a wonderful industry to be in.
Well, we're really impressed with your cables for sure.
Go ahead.
They just seem to be very high quality, and like Kenny said, you can twist them up and they're just flexible.
Yeah. Well, and more than anything, we just work hard to make sure that we're producing a quality product. You can find cheap cable, you can find cheap parts anywhere you want. You know, a million sites have them. But for me, again, it comes back to being confident in your system. If you want to know for a fact that you have a CPAP machine, that if you don't get that CPAP machining up and running, you're not boondocking, you're going to go plug in somewhere. You know, that's what it's all about for us, is making sure that the products I'm selling are working for you and not the other way around. That's just not how it should be.
Yeah.
I think that is all of our questions for you today, Steve. Is there anything that we might have missed or that you would like to add before we let you go?
I just want to say thank you so much for having me on here, you guys. I think what you're doing is amazing. Sean, if I may ask just a quick personal question. I think I saw a photo somewhere. Were you wearing a U.S. Air Force ball cap? Did you serve, sir?
Yeah, I did 20 years and about 2 months.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for your service. I want you to know.
Thanks for your support.
We sadly, we don't have a military discount at this time. We are working with a couple different plugins that'll actually be able to vet that. We've just had too many people trying to steal, the stolen valor, so to speak. And they'll say, oh, I'm a vet, you know, give me a discount. And so we want to make sure that we're appreciating those folks who have served and absolutely have gone out of their way to give us the freedom to have this conversation today. While being respectful and not getting abused in that, so to speak. So we're definitely working towards it, but thank you for your service personally. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for your support. And it's good that there are apps coming out now and APIs where you can, people have to verify their service, because there is a lot of that. I believe there is a lot of that stolen valor, and it really is a disservice to the veterans.
We do our best to help as we can, right? That's what we're all here for. And so we're thankful that we're in a position right now, especially with the way our world is going. You know, we're thankful to be in an industry where I'm actually able to help people. I've been in industries where that's not the case. It's all about making money. And I love the fact that I've been able to design systems for oxygen machines for folks driving around who were limited to their home because they required such a percentage of oxygen they couldn't get a mobile carrier. But we built a system in their vehicle, and now he's able to drive 2 hours to go see his daughter, you know, halfway around the state. You know what I mean? And so I love the fact we're in an industry that's all about people, that we're all about adventuring, that we're all about getting here and exploring and learning. That's what we're here for. So I love it. I appreciate what you guys do. And by all means, if anyone listening has questions, feel free to email us, call Inverters or us. Those guys are great. Call Battleborn. Those guys are great. Anything you guys need, just let us know. We're here to help.
Okay. Thanks so much, Steve. We appreciate it. And we look forward to having you back on in the future to see the growth and the busyness in your company.
Absolutely, folks.
Wow, that was an explosion of information. I really enjoyed chatting with Steven. I learned so much about the difference between DC and AC power, as well as the difference in the setup of cables and inverters and how they affect the efficiency when setting up solar on your RV. I really liked what he had to say about customer care and how they will take the time to help you build a power system even from scratch. Spartan Power sounds like a fantastic company, and if you are looking to build an off-grid system or just looking for some high-quality cables, check them out at SpartanPowerCables.com. I will add a link to their website in the show notes of this episode. Take care, everyone. Safe travels, and we will catch you next time.